Hi, I'm Lol Crawley. I have the pleasure of being here today to interview the cinematographer of Train Dreams, Adolfo. Welcome. Nice to see
Hello,
you.
all. Thank you very much for doing this. Can't believe it.
Pleasure, my pleasure. It really is a pleasure for me to be here with you. This film really resonated with me personally. It's an aesthetic, as I sure you can appreciate that really, yeah, it's very similar to my personal choices of script, of story, and your execution was beautiful. I thought it supported the performance and the themes and tone of the story wonderfully. So, and
Thank you.
congratulations on all of your nominations and wins so far for the movie.
Thank you very much. I'm a fan, so it's truly something amazing to be here with you because you are such an inspiration. So, yeah,
Well,
thank you.
thank you. That's very kind of you to say so. Thank you.
It's true.
Well, we'll have a nice chat. I have many things to ask you about the film. So,
I'm afraid.
yeah.
Don't be too hard on me.
No trick questions. No trick questions. It's your second collaboration with Clint Bentley, following your work on Jockey together. Could you talk a little about whether your approach has changed over the course of the two films, and indeed what that process sort of looks like?
Yeah, I mean, Jockey was a very small movie. We did it basically with a crew of 10 people and super small budget. And that had limitations, but also allowed us for so many amazing things, like having a smaller footprint and
Hmm.
not being so stuck with so many things that are hard to be free with in a bigger set, and we really liked that. So I mean, I think we did a lot of mistakes back then, but when we look back, there were so many things that we liked about it, and since the beginning when like we were talking about how to do Train Dreams, our whole conversation was okay. How can we preserve that? It is another scale. It is a much bigger movie, and it's a period piece on top of everything. But how do we preserve that, how we have a smaller footprint, how especially around actors and on set and on location, how do we make it look like it is a crew of just 10 people, so we have freedom to move around with the actors, to follow them from inside the cabin out, and not have 200 trucks parked outside, and how can we do shot and reverse within minutes, and we don't have to bring stand-ins and then wait and break the whole vibe. There was something that we wanted to keep from what we had in the first movie that was hard to get on this one, and there was a lot of conversations, and that involved every single department, and everybody had to do stuff that they were not necessarily used to and comfortable. So thanks everybody, because in the end I feel like it is really a team effort and everybody pulled it out. And but I feel like it was really important, and I feel like a lot of the really beautiful moments the movie has, especially with Joe and Felicity in the cabin, for example, just happened because of that. It
Mm.
just happened because we could roll the camera for half an hour non-stop and follow them around.
Yeah, I wanted to. That leads me on to the next question, actually, which was I'd read that the movie was pretty much 99% available light. Is that
I love
right?
that number, but
Yeah.
yeah, very accurate. But yeah, it's true. Every single scenes besides one actually. It's basically either natural light or practical lighting, real fire, real candles,
Mm.
real gas lamps, real campfires, or even when inside, just shaping light with windows and closing some windows to create contrast, or bringing like uh, negative feel and stuff like that, but never adding light, which again is an achievement that depends on a lot of people, a lot of departments, especially our department. Like the amount of things they had in terms of like candles and gas lamps and oil lamps and everything possible and stuff to make real campfires and etc. Was really important because we depended on that, but also because Alex built everything on location. So all the sets were basically built on location. That cabin was built on a location that we chose. It was really important to work together to, I mean, it's a privilege, but we could choose how to place the cabin. what orientation to choose. So we obviously look at what the sun was doing to choose like the placement of the cabin. The same thing with the fire tower. We really needed to be facing the sunset, and that fire tower was built. So we had to find a vista that had not only was believable that was high enough to be a fire tower, but also that faced the sunset. So it was a lot of like work from all possible departments. And I think the coolest thing is that I had a gaffer that really embraced that. I feel like sometimes it's not always the case. You can be like pushed to use lights that not necessarily you want to. But Kevin really embraced it, and not only was comfortable with it, but helped me explore ideas to have a firelight that was nicer and softer, for example. So we kind of like him with Ryan, the key grip, they built what we were calling the 1920s sky panel, which was basically like just almost the size of a sky panel on a 60 reflective surface that we could put a lot of candles inside, double wicks, and we put diffusion in front of it.
Right.
So
like a portable soft
exactly,
light.
yeah, which gave us the correct flicker of a firelight, and the right temperature, but like a softer light and a single shadowed light, because that's tricky, right? With lights, like with candles on a table, for example, it is amazing, but then when you realize you have so many shadows and they move around and they kind of look weird, so we wanted to have a softer light on some moments, especially when he's at home with Gladys, Joe, and Felicity. We wanted that to feel kind of nicer and softer. So we kind of were playing a lot with these artifacts that kept fire, but also kind of could work in our favor a bit.
Yeah. No, I think it's a real credit to your strength as a cinematographer, because I know how difficult that is. I mean, the very first film that I shot was Ballast for Lance Hammer, who I know you've also shot for. And I got the gig because of my desire to, well, both of, his desire to shoot available light. But I got, it's you have to be very brave with that commitment, and you can be, oh, well, I'll sneak a light in here, whatever, and the best things that we did were not lit, So I understand it's a very, it's to hold that line is a real credit to you, because it's also your strength as a cinematographer is to recognize when to leave it alone and when not to impose. And I think that's a real, I can see that within the work, it's
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, it's hard. I feel like that's something that came a lot from the way I actually learned to do things, because I mean, back in Brazil, when I started to shoot, all my first opportunities were those, like, okay, we don't have any money, we don't have lights, it is what it is. Maybe you have a camera here and you can do whatever with the lamps, that you can find in the house or whatever. So I feel like I shot so many things like that in the beginning of my career that I developed kind of my language through that. So I think I learned doing things that way. I learned to close windows instead of like adding lights.
Yes.
And then I got to a point where I was shooting bigger stuff, and then I had lights available and I started using them.
Yeah.
But they were never, not ever, but they were almost never for necessity. I was just using it because now I had them.
Yes. Yeah.
And then at some point I realized, but wait, like what I used to do was better. Like, what am I doing now?
Yeah.
So of course there are situations like in this movie that 1%.
Yes, yeah, the 1%.
But and I feel like depends on the movie, depends on what you're trying. Obviously, there's no. But I feel like on this one, it was one of those cases. Like it felt so important to be as naturalistic as possible, to remove all the layers between the viewers and the spectators. Like I wasn't expecting to connect with a story of American living in the 1920s in the middle of America, and I connected with it so much that I just hope that everybody else could connect with it too. And I feel like when you remove a bit the layers and allow people to feel they're almost like there with the characters, I feel like that can help. So it is a bit what I feel like we tried.
Well, I mean, I think that is incredibly successful in the film. That everybody is committed to that philosophy and ethos as well. You know,
Yeah,
because you could have a scenario where an actor, you have 40 minutes to shoot a scene, and an actor's doing the performance. Then they're like, "Well, just light the scene so I can carry that acting." That's my irate, frustrated actor
yeah,
impression. But that was, it's like, but it's like everybody comes on board and they go, okay, and you decide that. And it's credit to everybody that you lock into that.
totally.
You know.
It is a huge kudos to all the actors in the movie. I feel like they embraced it in a way that it was just possible because of that, because they were up to. There is this scene in the fire tower, for example, when Joe and Carrie are talking, that because it was such a long dialogue scene and kind of tricky, we decided to start a bit earlier than we would want to, just to give us time.
Cool.
And we started shooting it. And like after one or two takes, nothing was really right. Like the sun was high and they were like not really able to look at the sunset and
Sure.
feel the thing.
Right.
And like they couldn't even open their eyes because it was so bright, So the whole thing was so tricky, and Clint wasn't feeling it either. And I feel like it's big kudos to him to embrace all that and to create an environment that allows it. That he just says, you know what, let's just wait for it. Let's like hold for like an hour, and when the light feels good, let's come back to it. And of course, then everybody gets kind of tense. Producers are like, you sure? Like, what if you don't get it then? Like,
Yeah,
because then
of course.
it's dark and you didn't get the scene. But because that was already on like day 20 or whatever, we were so confident on how good the actors were and how everything would just flow when the camera was there shooting, that we felt like that was okay. And then when the light was back, was good, we went back and we shot it in like an hour, and
Yeah.
we did a couple takes on one side, a couple takes on the other, and it worked really beautifully because then they were feeling it and
Yeah.
they didn't need a lot of takes,
Yeah.
and then everything works somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So yeah, thanks, cast of Strange Dream.
I don't know if you're familiar with a Sunset Song, that was a novel that was turned into that was adapted by Terence Davis, a British filmmaker.
No.
And it's a turn of the century story about a farmer in remote Scotland who goes off to fight in the war. And I found a parallel between the two films. Really, it was interesting in the sense that the story of someone who lives in a isolated community or situation, and in Sunset Song they sort of see the birth of the railway getting closer and going off to war, and it has similar themes in a sense. I mean, I was going to say that that Robert Grenier, the central character of the film, he sort of comes from nothing and goes to nothing. Like the film is not a heavily plot driven film,
Yeah.
and his life is not exceptional, But I think it's kind of fascinating that you take a life like this. And how when you were first talking to Clint about that and that sort of exploration of this life that in many other, I mean, it echoes 1,000 other lives that were noticed in many ways,
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it is a story not about a guy that did anything necessarily remarkable. He didn't go to space. He's not a superhero. Which is basically almost all of us, And I feel like that's also one of the reasons that the story felt so connectable. And I remember when he first sent me the script, he was like I was saying before, he said, okay, this is the script. I'm not sure you're gonna like it or connect with it because it's a very American story, and like you might not connect, coming from Brazil, whatever. And when I read it, I was just so surprised of how much that I connected with it. Like it, I mean, you for sure know that, but it felt like a cinematographer's life, like this guy that goes away for work for 3-4 months, working with a bunch of people he never saw before, that he might never see again. A lot of them are kind of weirdos. Then he goes back home. It's really hard to reconnect with his house, his family,
Yeah.
all the small things that changed while he was away, and he doesn't really feel like he belongs either home or back at work. Doesn't feel like it's a feeling of misplacement always, which is basically our life. I think the whole time, and like we go to do a movie several months away from home, and we might, I mean, most of the people we're working with we might never see again, might encounter some familiar faces later, but it's always so hard for me to go back home to, and know what to do when I'm back home, and everything that changed while I was away,
Yeah.
and some other aspects in the movie, grief and stuff like that everybody goes through, that
Yeah.
we just wanted to I mean, for me, felt so important if I could connect with that, like
Yes.
coming from Brazil, and why not everybody else? And I feel like that's the thing with the movie, and also like huge part of it is Joe. He's such an amazing actor. It's a movie that almost don't have any dialogue, and a lot of silence, and you just get so connected with him regardless, with his body language, with his expressions, that I feel like it is a lot. The fact that people are connecting a lot with it has a lot to do with his work on it.
Absolutely. No, I mean, the leads, Felicity and William H. Macy, I mean, they're terrific performances. But also, I think, I'm a fan of handheld cinematography, and obviously there's a lot. There's obviously a lot in this, and as you know, there's I assume, but you find a real pleasure and privilege, I would say, in operating a handheld camera. So much so that sometimes when I approach a film, I have to catch that I'm not, shooting that scene handheld for my own pleasure. That I'm in
to have some fun.
Yeah, that I'm in the service of the film. And I bring that up because I think there's a very strong human connection. Like, I regard you as a cinematographer that is a listener. And your sensibility comes through, that you're listening. You're not imposing, you're not dogmatic, I assume, about how the look of something. You're finding it, and you're letting the world tell you, how the film should be, as much as anything else, which I recognize. And the act of a handheld camera is an absolute, for that moment between action and cut, it's yours to win or lose, in the sense of, and when you lock into that performance with an actor, it's a very it's a privilege.
Well, I don't even know what to say. I'm flattered.
Yeah.
I feel like it is a huge part of what I do is to be reactive and to listen more than to impose. That's what I try to do a lot. So it's amazing to hear that translates and you can feel that. And I feel like handheld is one of the ways of doing it. I feel like there's, as you said, like you need to think about if that's actually what the scene needs.
Yes.
Because it is easy to go for it because you enjoy it. I enjoy it too. Like it's so much fun to be like those takes that we were doing sometimes with improvisation, and like just Joe and Felicity running around the house with the kids and the chicken, whatever, for like 40 minutes nonstop.
Yeah.
I had so much fun doing those, like, and felt so special in the moment. But I feel like it's always a balance, and I feel like the important thing is also to plan everything, but always be open to what's happening and react. And I think that's also what Clint does a lot with what the actors are doing and with what the world is giving him. So I feel like it is really amazing to work with him because of that. We always kind of like, we have that same, I feel like, mindset of, we planned a lot. This is the shot we want to do. We know the shots we want to do. We know we want the scene to be here. But if then suddenly the scene is not working, or if the actors are feeling something else and they want to be outside instead of inside, whatever, we're gonna go for it. And I feel like that goes into what you were saying about like reacting more than. And I feel like same thing while the scene is happening. I feel like when you are operating the camera, and that's why I come from a place like Brazil. You are always operating camera there. There's not like it's not common that you would have an operator for you, and I feel like because I sort of learned it that way, it is really hard for me to think about not being on the camera and operating and reacting. I feel like there's so many things that you can do if you are there reacting to what the actors are doing. If something happens, you can adapt, you can push go closer or wider or change or adapt to stuff that I feel like if you have then another layer in between the actors and you, kind of you might be losing that. And I feel like there's ways of working. I feel like some people do it in a brilliant way. I don't think that's right or wrong, but for me, it's so important to be with the actors and to react to what they are doing. That yeah, there's nothing better than just like be around them with a camera.
Yeah. And you were filming in Washington State in
Yeah.
Spokane, is that right?
Yeah, we shot kind of all over the state, mostly around Spokane, but we went closer to the border with Canada, around Seattle. We needed so many different types of forests and locations that we had to drive quite
And
far.
so you were lucky. It's set in Spokane, so you were lucky.
Yeah, Idaho
Yeah.
and
Right.
Washington. So it is kind of the same environment that we needed, which
And-
is good. Yeah.
And 29 days, is that right?
29 days,
Wow.
yes.
Wow. Very impressive.
And bits and pieces, like a
Yeah.
makeup test that became a
Yes.
thing,
Yeah, I'm just going through that at the moment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And what was the most challenging aspect of either the the tight schedule or just logistics of working in an environment in that way? Was there a standout moment of feeling?
I think I feel like a bit everything you just said, like the fact that we didn't have a lot of time that
Yeah.
at first felt actually scary, like just 29 days felt short for the movie.
Mm.
But then after we started shooting, especially like after day one, that we understood that not only we're getting what we wanted, what we needed to keep the schedule, but we will always find time to like do a bit of something different, an improvisation, or just chase something different. So in the end, that wasn't really a thing, even though like it sounds like it. But I feel like it was enough, especially with the actors we had. Like we didn't necessarily need a bunch of takes. We could move fast.
Mm.
But I feel like the biggest thing was protecting the core of the filming, so that it felt, again, going back to the conversation, that it felt almost like it was a 10-person crew.
Yeah.
And that means that everybody sometimes needs to do double the work, because then the trucks need to be parked further away and et cetera, et cetera. So it is really hard on everybody. And I'm really grateful that everybody embraced it and went for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you shot the film digitally
Correct.
on a Alexa 35 with that was cameras and super speeds.
That was it.
If I
Yeah, and see. Yeah.
Was there ever a conversation about not shooting digitally, or was it? I can't remember how you shot Jockey. Was that film or digital?
No, that was digital too.
Yeah, yeah.
We did talk in the beginning about potentially shooting on film. We got to the conclusion that we wouldn't be able necessarily to do everything we wanted to do shooting on film in terms of like natural light, shooting just with candles and doing really long takes, like 40-minute takes, and the handheld camera nonstop for those 40 minutes. And there were so many things that felt more important for the story and for the acting and everything else that it just came out of the equation really fast. And I'm glad we did, because I think with the combo we had with the Alexa 35 and those two sets of lenses, especially like the super speed for the night stuff, we didn't have any issues. A lot of the scenes are lit by a single candle, and it handled perfectly. And with the dynamic range too, the 35 now has, like we could capture everything, like
and also the blacks are still really strong. You don't feel like it's lifted in the shadows, because you're really trying to drag the image out of that, which was really notable. Touching on what we spoke about as well, but I feel like the Again, what resonated is this sense of one, almost 1 foot in. I feel like your approach is almost to have 1 foot in the documentary. You know, that idea of sort of being alive in the moment. Is that something you would agree with? That sort of idea of I mean, have you ever shot documentaries? You don't come from a documentary background.
No, I did shoot one documentary that was actually what Clint saw when he first invited me to do Jockey.
Right.
Because especially on that first movie, we wanted to blend it a lot, the documentary and fiction. That when he saw the documentary I shot, he felt that could be it. So I'm really grateful that one day he watched that documentary. And then we did a lot of that on Jockey, and that's was one of the things that we wanted to repeat on this one. I feel like the main difference with Train Dreams is that we didn't want it to feel like a documentary. We wanted it to feel like still photography.
Yeah.
In a way that it could like feel like the whole movie is kind of like pictures that are coming to life somehow, like these pictures of that person's whole life that are kind of out of order, and some are really posed, some are really spontaneous, and etc. So
yeah.
I feel like that was more the sense that we wanted to evoke, and yeah, some pictures you take, you come to a place like this, and you're there and you pose. Some pictures are just someone snapping something while you are cooking, and some pictures are okay, let's go for a picture, So that was kind of the feeling we wanted, and that's why we also like a lot of the references we discussed was still photography.
Yes, and also the idea of dreams. I mean, the train dreams and memory, and the sense of what's done beautifully, executed beautifully in the photography and the editing, is this idea of kind of swimming in and out of memory and the present, which is something I'm a sucker for not just that visually, but the exploration of life being messy and non-linear, and not quite knowing what is the past and what is the present, etc. And
yeah, I feel like this is what we try to do. Like, memory is such a central piece in the movie. Like, basically, even with the way the movie ends with like the memories and him going through those, and the way that those memories are actually different from what actually happened in the movie. They use different takes on that montage, for example. So everything is slightly different from what happened before. And there's something beautiful about the way that memories are different from reality. That's like why we decided, for example, to own basically almost all the scenes of him and Felicity while they're in the cabin, etc. A lot of them are shot in blue hour, magic hour.
Yes.
Because we wanted it to feel more magical. Like the way he remembers that part of his life, it is really sweet. It is really magical. So we love that idea of, okay, this is it. This is how we're supposed to operate this moment. So we can translate that somehow. And then the first time you see a really harsh sun in the movie, actually, is just after the house is burned. And then you cut to like, it's the first shot in the movie where the sun is super high, and it feels like, fuck, this is the harsh reality.
Sure.
It's not. So it's basically that thing, how you remember things. And I feel like you remember things in different ways. I have memories myself that I'm not really sure if that's what actually happened, is the way I remember.
Yeah.
And some memories I'm not even sure if I remember the right thing, or I just remember the picture I saw of that moment. So.
Well, sometimes memories are so, you live with a memory, 100% sure that it's correct, and then you will articulate it, and after you said it, you're like, that could possibly have happened, and yet you haven't questioned it whilst it's just remained in your head,
True.
Which is kind of fascinating. I think, expanding on that point, I think at the end of the film, I haven't read the novella that it's based on. My feeling is that there may be more train, like sense of him on this journey on a train and going, dipping back into that. Could be wrong. But what I thought was was beautifully executed is when he's on the train in the 60s, and I think it's 68 that he dies. I think it's what it says in the film, and you start looking out at the rural landscape, but then there's a road that's been cut through with modern,
a bridge,
for that time, modern cars.
So. Oh yeah, that whole sequence, like that starts on the train with the bridge, and then the moon landing,
yes,
and then with the plane, was a lot about that, like how things change and that shock with reality. And also I feel like because that's suddenly him realizing so many things at the same time, especially with the plane, and that was the reason we wanted to keep any high shots for the ending. So I mean, the first thing we think is like, okay, you need a drone shot here to show the place, whatever, and we decided not to go to that for a lot of reasons. One being like the way we wanted to portray nature, but also to save that higher point of view to the end with him. Like he wasn't thinking that the world looked like that. He was seeing it for the first time. He just saw the guy on the moon, and he's like, oh wait, that's us. And then he goes hi, and that's when he sees it through a different perspective, and that's why we kept it for that moment. And I feel like it makes it so much stronger to then suddenly for the first time you're also like seeing things through a different perspective. And I mean, before a few minutes before that in the movie, you have him looking at the mirror for the first time, like, which is also like,
I wanted to ask you about that mirror shot. How is, because you don't see the camera reflected. How did you achieve it?
No, we just we just a bit higher his head, so his head was almost touching the camera basically, and we just had a rig
through a hole.
No. It was a shot that we didn't even have on the script. We were at the theater location, and Alex, the production designer, grabbed us, Clint and I, say like, we need to do something in this toilet. Come here. And then we were just like, okay, let's see. And she was like, it's amazing. Look at this toilet. We need to shoot something here. And then Clint came up with this idea of like him looking at himself in the mirror. And that was during the scout. And then we thought about, okay, it would be amazing if he kind of never sees himself in a mirror until that moment. So we kind of like removed all the mirrors from the cabin and everything else. So that's the kind of first mirror.
Oh wow! So that was shot early enough in the shoot, the mirror.
No, that was like doing the recce that we saw the mirror, and then,
so it informed the
the
design,
which is amazing.
That's I love it when you have those cyclical kind of moments.
That was big kudos to Alex.
The other thing I wanted to ask was there's some moments in the language of the film that feel quite modern in contrast to the handheld in some ways. I was speaking with Clint about it just the other night when we met. But there's early in the film where the camera is attached to a falling tree, and then also the whip pans with the back and forth of the soaring. They feel very mechanized. They feel like the mechanization of that logging. In contrast to the more lyrical camera movements of the thing. Was that something that was that intentional, or?
Yes, going back to what I was saying, we really wanted the camera to be reactive to not only what was happening, but the characters. And talking about the tree shot, for example, we really wanted the nature to be another character in the movie, and we wanted to shoot it that way. And like that's why we also decided on not shooting it with a drone, and like, okay, how we shoot nature like we're shooting any other character in the movie. And basically all those first shots in the movie are like about nature, and you're kind of seeing nature, and that's kind of the first time you see him, right? Like, so the tree falls, the camera's rigged to the tree, and then you cut to the tree down, and you go from one guy that is like with cutting the trees, and then you find your hero basically through a very sharp move to kind of evoke that, okay, this is nature. All the shots are kind of trying to be as poetic as possible about nature and showing its beauty, but then suddenly unexpected happens. The camera is rigged to a tree. You think you're just looking up on a tree, and that camera falls down with the tree, like you are with the tree. and then you see the effect that humans are having on that place through a very mechanized kind of move. So I was always trying to think with Clint, like, okay, what is this moment in the movie? We had certain rules about, like, okay, when he's younger or a teenager, that's the way the camera behaves, or in his adult life or later, but also between his two lives, between the cuts, the work life, and him back home with the family, which we wanted it to be softer and kind of nicer. And then when he's back at the cut, everything feels more mechanical and kind of following the almost like the train cutting through nature.
Yeah. And the zooms, the use of the zooms, which I loved, a kind of Barry Lyndon-esque in terms of their kind of extreme use of the focal length, and being tight in on William H. Macy, sort of in his own moment, and then pulling out and revealing all the work is actually doing the work.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I love that too, because I always loved it when I first read the script. Like I felt it felt so fun. It's kind of very different from the rest of the movie somehow. It's kind of a funny moment in the movie, which is always tricky because, okay, how do we shoot that? How do we make it still be part of the movie, but how can we bring some humor to that?
Yeah.
And I think especially after Will Macy got attached, okay, we could trust that it would work regardless, but we wanted to do something with the camera that was also informative about it. And because the scene is always about him bragging and talking, and you kind of like see that no one around him is kind of like engaging, everybody's doing the hard work while he's just like talking. We thought about the use of the zooms to kind of start closer to him, and you kind of there hearing all the nonsense he's talking about, and you slowly reveal that everybody's doing the hard work, or everybody's just like not listening, and the guy is there for a reason. It's kind of the sequence that you understand who that man was, and how even though he was just there talking, he's there for a reason. He has a very specific function in the cut, the guy that explodes things basically.
Yes.
And then in the end, you also with a zoom out, you reveal again, and he's successful with the explosion. So we like the idea of that for the humor it could bring. And I always say that I'm so surprised that the camera is not shaking in that scene, because I was laughing the whole time. Right. And he was like doing his thing. I couldn't just stop laughing while trying to really slowly do that zoom, and be very precise.
I had a question about that, the cutting of that scene, and whether you knew anything about that. That the scene presumably, was shot that there's two failed attempts, and then he finally blows up. But I like the way it's edited, that you see the failures, then you explore him, and then you come back to the same moment and he's successful. It's not another attempt at it.
Yeah. It's the same.
Yeah.
That was on the script. So
Right.
we just decided on how to shoot it based on the script, and they kept it in that.
Yeah. And the fire sequence, the sort of very dramatic, well executed fire sequence, what can you tell us about that? How much was VFX? And
Time to talk about the 1%. So that was basically the big scene for lighting, because we couldn't burn the forest down, and we wouldn't even if we could. And the main, I think the main worry for me was, okay, how do we make this believable, especially with the fact that every other fire in the movie that you see is real. Like whenever you see a fire in the movie, it's real. The light on their faces is gonna feel one way. The temperature, the flickering, everything is gonna feel one way. How can we recreate that on this scene so it doesn't pop from everything else?
Yeah.
And that was quite stressful for me. So I feel like that's the thing we tested the most. Kevin Cook, the gaffer, found actually a really cool rig full of par cans that it was basically a rig for music concerts, because we needed something so large and tall that it was just amazing. It had the full size of that fire basically, and with then we realized that having different color temperatures depending on the height of the fixtures helped, because that's basically what you have with the fire, like kind of changes from the depending on the height. And they also had kind of an animation and a flicker that kind of after a lot of testing matched well what we had with real fire. And with smoke that SFX brought in and sparkles and everything, that was kind of a feeling. When we were there, it felt like there was a fire there, when we were not looking at the lights. And sometimes even with the smoke, it got so smoky that it could have been, like it was hard to notice. So I feel like they did an amazing job with the lights. And then the effects, I think, did an amazing job changing that for a wall of fire. I was really worried, but I feel like you can say. And
did you have to shoot fire elements that they used, or did they sort of...
Yes, we did. Yeah. We tried to give everything possible for them to
Yes.
to do their jobs, but I feel like especially sparkles and stuff like for foreground was an important asset.
And is there I just wanted to lastly ask you, is there a particular scene or moment that that you really enjoyed executing, or maybe even something that you thought, as you know, often it's the case when you're filming, what you think is successful can be the converse in the context of the film, and vice versa?
Well, it's hard. I feel like there's one scene that I used to love when we shot it, that I love, and then made the cut, and you're just like always frustrated, saying, okay, let's find a way to like just release that, and it is kind of frustrating in a way, but you understand the reasons, when you're seeing that it didn't have a place there. But I feel like one thing that I'm really happy when I watch the movie is seeing all those little moments that came from improvisation, like those half an hours that we would have every day to just then grab something with Felicity and Joe and the kids in the cabin, for example. They would just move around, or even like small moments of like, let's just make a small moment here of them cooking or stuff like that. They weren't scripted at all. That they just made so much out of it. And I feel like it feels special because I was seeing it almost like you're seeing a play, that you're seeing it there and you don't know the script, so there's no script, so you're seeing it while you're filming it, and it was special back then. Some of those moments felt so magical already. And in the movie, sometimes they are like 10 seconds, 2 seconds, just a shot, something like that. Some of them became longer scenes, but I feel like they were the most fun to shoot, and I feel like when I look back at them, I just love it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we'll end it there. Adolfo, thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.